Picture this. It's 1991. The Soviet Union, it's just gone. And you're a brand new country, suddenly independent. And oh yeah, you also happen to have a massive nuclear arsenal just sitting there, a relic from a dead empire. Now, this isn't some sci-fi plot. This was the actual reality for Ukraine. And believe me, it's one heck of a story about power, pressure, and promises.
So how many are we talking about? Roughly 1,700 strategic nuclear warheads. Now, just to put that into perspective for you, this wasn't like a few stray bombs. No way. This was a colossal arsenal, a real ghost of the Cold War just hanging around in this brand new nation. And boom, just like that, literally overnight, the brand new nation of Ukraine is the third largest nuclear power in the world. I mean, think about that. Their stockpile was bigger than the UK's, France's, and China's. Combined, they basically became an accidental superpower. So this brings us to the big question, right? The whole point of this explainer. If you've got that kind of power, the ultimate deterrent that's supposed to stop anyone from ever invading you, why on earth would you just give it all away? Well, the answer, it's a lot more complicated than you probably think. All right, so first things first, an accidental nuclear superpower. We got to get the context here. The fall of the Soviet Union in '91, it was pure chaos. Borders were being redrawn, and all this military hardware, including thousands of nukes, just got left behind on the territory of these new countries like Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. So the case for disarmament, it was a burden, not a weapon. And this is what's so fascinating, right? For Ukraine, getting all these nukes, it wasn't a gift. It was a massive, massive headache. Let's break down the four main reasons why getting rid of them wasn't just a choice, it was basically a necessity. Okay, reason number one, no operational control. This is absolutely key. The missiles and the warheads, yeah, they were physically sitting on Ukrainian soil, but Kiev couldn't actually launch them. Why? Because Moscow still had everything that mattered, the launch codes, the command systems, all the technical know-how. It's like the weapons were in Ukraine's house, but Russia still had all the keys and the alarm code. Then, reason number two, the immense cost and decay. You've got to remember, Ukraine in the early 90s, it was a brand new country with a totally shattered economy. Trying to maintain this incredibly complex, and not to mention aging, nuclear arsenal, it would have been ruinously expensive. I mean, these things were getting old. They needed a huge amount of money just to keep them from falling apart, never mind actually using them. And that leads us to reason three, the nuclear danger. This was a really deep-seated fear. The Chernobyl disaster, that was still a fresh, raw wound in the nation's memory. So Ukrainian leaders were absolutely terrified of another nuclear catastrophe on their own soil. They were worried these old, decaying warheads could leak or malfunction, basically creating another Chernobyl in slow motion. This wasn't just politics, This was about survival. And finally, reason number four, cold, hard cash. There were some pretty powerful financial incentives being dangled. The United States offered hundreds of millions of dollars to help pay for safely taking these weapons apart. And, this is a big one, Russia agreed to forgive Ukraine's huge energy debts for gas and oil. For a country that was basically on the brink of economic collapse, this wasn't just a good offer, it was a lifeline. So, a world of pressure. Because this wasn't just about Ukraine's internal problems. Nope. There was intense pressure coming from the outside too. The Cold War was over, but everyone was still kind of on edge. And the absolute last thing anyone wanted was for 3 or 4 new, kind of unstable nuclear powers to just pop into existence. And this pressure, it was coming from all over. Each of the big players had their own goals, right? The US was focused on making sure the Soviet arsenal didn't spread all over the place, non-proliferation. Russia, they wanted to gather up all those nukes and bring them home, solidifying their spot as the only nuclear heir to the USSR. And Ukraine? What did they want? They needed money for sure. They needed to be recognized as a real country on the world stage. And they desperately needed some kind of promise that their new borders would be safe. All of this negotiation, all of this pressure, it all came down to one single crucial document, the Budapest Memorandum. This was the deal, the agreement that made Ukraine's decision official and was supposed to, secure its future.
And things moved fast, really fast. Ukraine declares independence in '91. By '92, they're already committing to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Fast forward to January '94, and you've got the US, Russia, and Ukraine all signing off on the main terms. And then finally, in December of 1994, the Budapest Memorandum is officially signed. Done deal.
But, and this is maybe the most important part of the whole story, it all came down to the difference between two words: assurances versus guarantees. See, Ukraine wanted guarantees. That means a legally binding military promise. If you get attacked, we will come and defend you. But what they got were assurances, which is basically just a political promise. We promise to respect your borders. It's a huge difference, and American diplomats were super clear about this at the time. They made a point of saying that even though the Russian and Ukrainian word for both is garanti, everyone should understand it in the much weaker English sense of assurance.
You know, despite that crucial difference in wording, at the time, Ukraine's leaders really felt like their backs were against the wall. Their president, Leonid Kravchuk, said it himself back in 1994. There is no alternative to nuclear disarmament. For them, it really seemed like the only possible way forward.
And just like that, the deal was done. A promise broken. But those assurances, those promises that were supposed to protect Ukraine, well, they didn't last. Because in 2014 and then again in 2022, Russia, one of the countries that signed the agreement, completely violated it. First by annexing Crimea, and then with the full-scale invasion. The most fundamental promise of that whole deal, to respect Ukraine's borders and its independence, was just broken. And today, you can just feel the regret. There's this quote from Oleksandr Shushenko. He used to be a missile technician, and he puts it bluntly: "My personal view is that it was a mistake to completely destroy all the nuclear weapons." And honestly, that's a feeling you hear a lot in Ukraine now. Looking back, many people see it as a huge, catastrophic mistake. And yet, here's the tough part. Most historians, the people who have actually gone through all the declassified papers from back then, they tend to agree on something. This idea that Ukraine could have just kept the nukes, they say it's basically a myth. When you look at the reality, no control over the weapons, a collapsing economy, and the very real risk of a Chernobyl 2.0, their hands were pretty much tied. It wasn't just an option to disarm, it really was seen as the only option they had. So where does that leave us? Was this whole thing a tragic miscalculation, trading the world's most powerful weapon for a piece of paper that turned out to be worthless? Or was it the only sane choice they could have possibly made? An impossible decision for a new country in an impossible situation? You know, that's the question historians and the world are still grappling with today.